It happened over dinner. Nothing dramatic, just oysters, lemon wedges, and mint tea steeping quietly beside the window. The kind of meal that slips by unnoticed, soft and practiced after years of habit. Sophie was glowing. She'd landed some sleek position at a gallery downtown, and her voice was rich with accomplishment, filling the room like it finally belonged there. I smiled, nodded, murmured the right affirmations. But something in me had already gone quiet. I remember the exact moment. Her fork paused midair, her eyes bright with certainty. "Lily's like an angel," she said. "She's so composed and grounded. Honestly, Mom, you could learn a thing or two from her." I didn't flinch. I kept chewing. But inside, there was a shift. Not a wound, not even anger. Just that small internal click, like a box being gently closed and shelved. Like I'd been moved quietly out of the frame and no one noticed the light change. She passed me the tea. I thanked her. My hands were steady. But somewhere underneath the table, a piece of me began listening differently. Quietly. Carefully. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I could walk into a room and the conversation would shift, slightly, the way wind shifts around a corner. People listened. I wore power like a silk blouse, quiet, expensive, never wrinkled. I signed contracts with a pen that clicked like a trigger and knew the names of men whose signatures reshaped cities. And then, a baby. A marriage. A subtle undoing. It wasn't all at once. There's a lie people tell about sacrifice, that it happens in grand gestures. No. It happens gradually. A single missed flight because the nanny cancelled. A promotion passed over, just this once. A pivot toward something more flexible. Then you're the one at home making sure everyone's tetanus shots are up to date and that no one accidentally puts tinsel in the compost. The one who knows which neighbor borrowed the ladder and never returned it. Who relabels the holiday boxes every year and keeps track of the expiration dates on the fire extinguishers. I became invisible not because they made me, but because I believed that love was a form of competence. I thought the highest expression of care was to remove friction from other people's lives. To disappear just enough that everything ran smoothly around me. They didn't see it as love. They saw it as the natural state of things. And Sophie? Sophie grew up thinking her life just floated that way. Effortless. Like the fridge restocked itself. Like Christmas presents arrived on their own, wrapped and labeled. Like dinner plans and carpool arrangements and perfectly timed holiday photos all happened as part of the weather. It's not her fault, really. She only saw what I allowed her to see. But that night, when she said I could learn a thing or two from Lily, something inside me recoiled. Not with jealousy. With recognition. Because I know that kind of woman. Lily, with her scented oils and her voice like chamomile, drifting through conversations as if she were born to soothe. I'd seen her type at fundraisers, always arriving late and barefoot, speaking in low tones about energy and intention. The kind of woman who performs intimacy with casual precision. Who wraps exploitation in silk scarves and gratitude journals. When Daniel left, he said we'd grown in different directions. I didn't cry. I let him pack his leather-bound notebooks and his imported French razors into a suitcase I had once bought him for a birthday he forgot. He met Lily at a retreat in Big Sur. Of course he did. She called me once, early on. Said she respected the history I had with him. I remember thinking how careful her words were, like stepping stones laid just far enough apart that you could fall between them and drown. I didn't return the call. Now she sends Sophie handwritten notes scented with eucalyptus. Sometimes little stones tied with ribbon and a quote. I found one tucked into the guest room drawer after Sophie's last visit. It said, "Be like the moon, still, silent, and always reflecting." Reflecting what? I started noticing small things. Sophie talking about alignment and holding space. Her wardrobe changing, more linen, more flow. Books on her shelves about inner child work and trauma cycles. None of it hers originally. It had Lily's voice underneath, like a ghost note in music. But it was the finances that caught my attention. Lily's studio. A wellness space she opened with angel funding. Vague ownership structures. Her name wasn't on the lease, but her face was on every brochure. She offered workshops on intuitive leadership and vibrational authenticity. Charged $400 for an hour-long soul audit. The money didn't track. The studio was on a prime corner downtown, next to a bookstore and an artisanal coffee shop with rose foam lattes. Rent alone had to be over $5,000 a month. But her income was fluid, as Sophie put it. She doesn't believe in scarcity. Neither did Bernie Madoff. I began to pay attention. Not out of malice. Out of instinct. It felt like watching someone decorate a house with termites in the beams. And Sophie, my Sophie, was folding herself into Lily's world like parchment. She mirrored her phrasing, defended her choices, began to speak of Daniel's past as if she had lived through it with Lily instead of me. I felt myself vanishing in her memory. So I began documenting. Slowly. Quietly. I downloaded screenshots. Noted inconsistencies. Searched public records. Found nothing dramatic, just friction. Gaps. Discrepancies between the life Lily lived and the one she claimed. It became a kind of second skin, this quiet investigation. I didn't know what I was looking for. I only knew that I could feel something pressing at the edges of Sophie's life, reshaping her. And that I wasn't going to be told to learn a thing or two from it. Not after everything I had built. Not after everything I had held together while others called it luck. One night, alone at the kitchen table, I found an old file folder with printouts from my working years. Financial models I had built. Notes from negotiation meetings. A quote in the margin from someone who once called me the most efficient strategist I've ever met. I had forgotten that version of myself. Not just her skills, but her instincts. I poured myself a glass of white wine, nothing expensive, just cold and dry, and opened a new notebook. I wrote one sentence: you don't remove a parasite by yelling at the host. Then I started planning. I wasn't always this quiet. There was a time when my voice echoed across boardroom tables, calm, confident, necessary. I used to wear dark wool suits with silk linings, keep my nails filed sharp, and carry 2 phones in my bag. I negotiated contracts that made the papers. I had a name. One that others said before meetings began. But that part of me, she faded gradually. Not all at once. First came the move, Daniel's new job, better pay, better schools. I remember how he phrased it, just a small pause in your career, Nora. You'll be back in no time. Then came Sophie. Sleepless nights. Diapers. Feedings at 2 a.m. I had planned to return after 6 months. But Sophie had colic. Then allergies. Then separation anxiety. Each time I packed my briefcase, something kept me home. Just until she's more settled, I told myself. Later never came. Instead, I became the scaffolding. The woman who remembered dentist appointments, who baked cupcakes for school parties, who filled out field trip forms and tax documents. I became the calendar, the margin notes, the never-visible thread that kept our lives from unraveling. And I didn't mind. Truly. I wasn't making a sacrifice, I was investing. In my family. In our foundation. I thought that was what love meant. Real love. The unglamorous, invisible work that builds stable people. I never needed applause. Just acknowledgement. A quiet knowing that I mattered. But that night, when Sophie leaned back in her chair, sipped her tea and praised Lily like she was some celestial miracle, I realized something sharp and bitter had been forming beneath the surface of my smile for years. Honestly, Mom, you could learn a thing or two from her. It hadn't been said with malice. Sophie's tone was breezy, offhand, like she was offering a compliment to one woman and a suggestion to another. But it lodged in me like a shard. Lily. Composed. Grounded. Someone I could learn from. That was the moment the air shifted. I nodded, still tasting lemon and mint on my tongue. My fork moved toward another oyster, but my appetite had turned. Something else was working now, quietly, methodically. A kind of noticing. And I began to collect. At first, it was just oddities. Lily's glowing testimonials on her blog, always suspiciously similar in tone. Her studio's rent, far too high for someone whose coaching sessions were booked, by referral only. The receipts didn't line up. Her business registrations were vague, often expired. The more I looked, the more inconsistencies surfaced. A coaching license that hadn't been renewed. A claimed certification from a school that no longer existed. Income reports that didn't quite match what she flaunted online. But I said nothing. Not then. Instead, I observed. Like I used to do before closing a deal, before the final slide deck came out, before the signature went on the page. I'd wait, let the room talk, let the others reveal themselves. Daniel had always mocked that part of me. Paranoid Nora, he called it. Always 10 steps ahead of ghosts. But they were never ghosts. They were just quieter truths. The kind that people don't say out loud. Lily wasn't a person to Sophie. She was an idea. A shining reflection of everything Sophie wanted to become. Wellness. Balance. Composure. A curated life. And I was the before. The scaffolding. The woman who had held the net while everyone else walked tightropes. The injustice wasn't loud. That's what made it dangerous. It came in soft redirections. Let's ask Lily, she's got a better eye for that. Or, Lily says grounding practices are more effective than talk therapy. Suddenly, my advice wasn't just outdated. It was inconvenient. Even Daniel, from his sleek new condo with its endless glass windows, had fallen under Lily's quiet spell. He'd stopped calling after she and Sophie grew close. You know how it is, he'd said in his last email. Boundaries. I began to understand something deep, something maternal and ancient. This wasn't a rivalry. It wasn't jealousy. It was replacement. They weren't erasing me out of cruelty. They simply believed they'd found a better version. A younger, prettier, more composed model of womanhood. One that came without baggage. One they didn't owe anything to. And I had let it happen. Years of stepping back. Of making room. Of not wanting to impose. I had trained them, unwittingly, to see me as optional. But I wasn't optional. I was essential. I just needed to remind them. So I began to build something. Quietly. Carefully. The way I used to. I created a name. Genevieve Martin. A woman with a soft-spoken voice, an inheritance, and a desperate need for emotional realignment. I used one of the old phones from my consulting days, scrubbed, clean. I registered a new email, paid someone on Fiverr to create a polished Instagram page with curated photos and vague affirmations. I posted stock images of candles, journal prompts, and spiritual journeys. And then I reached out to Lily. I've heard such wonderful things about your work, I wrote. I'm going through a major life transition and could use some guidance. I'd love to schedule a session if you're accepting new clients. She responded within 3 hours. Polite. Warm. Enthusiastic. Of course she was accepting. Of course she had space. Of course she'd meet at the studio, or over Zoom, whichever felt more aligned. We chose Zoom. Genevieve's camera was always off. A trauma response, I explained. I'm not ready to be seen yet. Lily nodded, understanding, her face lit with soft filters and practiced empathy. The first session was general. She asked about my childhood. My energetic patterns. She recommended crystals and shadow journaling. By the third session, she was offering advice that danced dangerously close to psychotherapy, without a license. By the fifth, she was confessing frustrations about Sophie. She's still working through mother wounds, Lily said, sipping tea from a mug that read abundance is your birthright. Her mom was so rigid, so withholding. You can see the scars in how she seeks validation. I nodded, silent. And I recorded everything. Audio. Screenshots. Payments. Email chains. Her rates were inconsistent, sliding scales for some, premium pricing for others. Her business license, expired. Her certifications, unverifiable. Her testimonials, 2 of them used stock photos I traced back to a wellness website in Canada. Each detail filed in a folder marked simply, Lily. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I wasn't going to shout or confront. That wasn't the language they heard anymore. They only understood silence and collapse. I sent the dossier anonymously to 3 places, the State Wellness Board, the IRS, and 2 of her corporate clients whose testimonials she'd forged. The first crack appeared 2 weeks later. A pause in her coaching practice. Then, a reassessment of licensing. Then a flood of questions on her blog about refund policies. Sophie mentioned it over brunch. Lily's going through something, she said, stirring her coffee. She's thinking of taking time off to regroup. I nodded, expression neutral. Sometimes stepping back is the best move, I offered. Sophie sighed. You always were good at weathering things. I don't know how you stayed so steady all these years. I smiled, sipping my tea. I didn't answer. Not yet. I wasn't angry. Not in the way I expected to be. I didn't feel triumphant either. What I felt was more like steadiness. A quiet, steady return to center, as if a long, slow spin had finally stopped. Lily's influence over Sophie faded gradually. 1 week, her name was in every sentence. The next, it slipped out less. Then it didn't come up at all. She took down some of the framed quotes Lily had given her. She swapped out the crystals on her windowsill for a potted plant. A small thing, but I noticed. Mothers notice these things. Sophie called more often after that. Her tone was different. Softer, yes, but not weak. More thoughtful. She wanted to talk without sounding like she had something to prove. One evening, she came by after work. She brought soup from a deli I used to love and let herself in with the spare key I'd told her years ago she could always use. We sat in the kitchen. She seemed unsure how to start the conversation. She looked around like she hadn't really seen the room in a while. I used to think Lily had all the answers, she said finally. She seemed so calm. So in control. I didn't say anything. I waited. I told you once that you could learn something from her, she added, not looking up. And now I see how ridiculous that was. I let that settle. There was no need to rush in and comfort her for something she'd already learned the hard way. She made me feel like I was healing, Sophie continued. But it wasn't healing. It was performance. She knew what I wanted to hear and gave it back to me with soft music playing in the background. I nodded. It happens. She seemed to expect more. A lecture maybe. But I didn't give one. There was no point. She wasn't defending Lily anymore. She wasn't defending herself either. We ate quietly for a while. The soup was still hot. The kitchen smelled like thyme and buttered bread. I think I wanted her to be the mother I imagined, she said. Someone calm and wise and distant, I guess. I didn't want real mess or real memories. I just wanted someone who said the right things. I understood what she meant, though she didn't phrase it perfectly. You wanted a version of motherhood you could control, I said. And Lily gave you that, until she didn't. She nodded, eyes full. And what did I give you? I asked. She didn't answer right away. You gave me everything that actually worked, she said. And I didn't see it. That was enough. I didn't need an apology. I needed to hear that she understood the difference. Later, as she was leaving, she stopped in the doorway. I still want you in my life, she said. I don't know if I've earned that, but I do. I just nodded. Not out of coldness, but because I knew she meant it. And I didn't want to ruin the moment with anything performative. It wasn't a movie scene. It was something better, real. A few days later, I got an email from Daniel. Short and formal, the way his messages had become. Did you know anything about Lily's issues? He wrote. There's been some fallout. The state is reviewing her credentials. IRS contacted me. Some documents listed me as a business partner. I didn't reply right away. I reread it twice. Then I wrote, no, I didn't know anything. Sounds difficult. Hope it gets sorted. I kept it simple. I wanted him to sit with it. There was no follow-up. I went about my week as usual, grocery shopping, checking in on a friend whose husband was recovering from surgery. I cleaned out the coat closet and found a folder of old notes from my consulting days. Printouts, hand-drawn diagrams, client records from a time when I used to walk into rooms and be listened to without anyone asking if I had permission to speak. On a whim, I called a former client, Ellen, a woman who used to run a nonprofit in the city. We hadn't spoken in 10 years, but she answered right away. I've been thinking about reaching out to you, she said. I could use someone who knows what she's doing. We talked for 45 minutes. She had a staff issue. I listened, asked a few questions, made a few notes. By the end of the call, she asked what my rate was. I told her I'd think about it and call back. That evening, I opened a new file folder on my computer, Clients, 2025. I didn't plan to rebuild a full practice. But I wanted a few things of my own again, something with structure, with dignity. I emailed 2 more old contacts. By the end of the week, I had 3 small contracts pending. Nothing life-changing. But steady. Mine. Sophie came over that weekend. She brought a stack of documents and sat at the dining room table without asking. These are for you, she said. It's my living trust, some account information, and a few things I need you to look over. I glanced at the papers. Are you updating everything? I asked. Yes. After all this. I realized I've been careless. Trusting the wrong people. Ignoring the right ones. I skimmed the documents. They were clear. Well prepared. She'd hired a lawyer who knew what they were doing. There was a section unfilled, health proxy. I want that to be you, she said. If that's okay. It surprised me. I had expected her to choose someone younger. A friend. Maybe even Daniel. But she looked serious. She wasn't offering out of guilt. I trust you to make the hard calls, she said. You always have. So I signed. Quietly. And that night, we watched a movie in the living room like we used to when she was little. We didn't talk much. Just sat near each other. It was enough. A week later, Daniel emailed again. This time he sounded less composed. Something about tax documents. Something about damage control. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. Instead, I cleaned out the spare bedroom and turned it into a study. I put my old leather portfolio on the desk. My name, Nora Henley, still embossed in gold. It had been years since I'd used it, but it still felt like mine. In the drawer, I found a note I'd once written to myself. Don't give away what you've earned just because others stopped noticing it. I left it there. That weekend, I met with one of the new clients. A young woman with an overbearing business partner and a team too afraid to speak up. She reminded me of myself 30 years ago. She asked, "How do you stay calm in meetings where everyone's pretending?" I said, "You stop pretending first." She stared at me for a second, then nodded. I walked home feeling something I hadn't in years, not pride exactly. Something quieter. Like standing in your own shoes after years of wearing someone else's. That night, Sophie texted. Just a simple message, "Dinner tomorrow?" I replied, "Yes. My place." And then I put the phone away. Dinner the next evening was quiet but comfortable. Sophie came alone. No apologies, no explanations, just a small bag of groceries and a warm look. She knew the kitchen well enough to move around it without asking. We made pasta. Nothing elaborate. Just garlic, olive oil, crushed red pepper, and a bit of lemon zest. I poured 2 glasses of wine, and we ate at the table without music or distraction. At some point between the second forkful and the third, she said, "I think I knew about Lily." Not everything. But something didn't feel right. I just didn't want to face it. "You wanted it to be real," I said. "It's easier than admitting you were wrong." She looked down. I was tired of being disappointed. "Dad and I, you know how things are." I nodded. "And you," she paused. "Sometimes I felt like I couldn't measure up to what you used to be. What you gave up." I waited. I thought Lily made me feel better because she didn't ask for anything. But that wasn't love. It was marketing. There was a long pause. Just the sound of the clock ticking over the stove. "You've never made me feel like I owed you anything," she said. "But now I realize I do. Not in guilt. But in truth." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. It felt better that way. When she left that night, she kissed me on the cheek like she used to. I stayed at the door a long while after she was gone, thinking how strange it is that love can be so constant, and still feel like something you rediscover. The next morning, I found a letter on my doorstep. No return address. No stamp. Just my name, Nora, in clean handwriting. Inside was a brief, unsigned note. "I thought you should know. She's gone. Moved out. No forwarding address." I knew who it was from. Daniel never could face things directly. I folded the paper in half and slid it into a drawer. Later that day, I pulled out the file I'd kept on Lily. It was thick now, documents, transcripts, screenshots. All carefully sorted, dated, and labeled. I considered throwing it out. But I couldn't bring myself to just yet. Instead, I tucked it into a fireproof box in the closet. Not as a weapon. As a reminder. Because people like Lily don't just appear once. They come back, wearing new scarves and using different words. And next time, I wanted to remember how it felt to know the truth and act on it, quietly, but completely. By mid-March, I had 4 consulting clients. All women. All dealing with some version of what I'd been through. One was negotiating a divorce settlement with a man who claimed she was too emotional to manage finances. Another was being pushed out of a family business by her younger brother. Another still was just trying to figure out how to say no to people she loved without hating herself. I didn't fix their lives. But I helped them think clearly. I showed them how to hold the line without raising their voice. I gave them the tools I had buried years ago under casseroles, booster shots, and Christmas cards. It was honest work. Not flashy. But honest. One of them asked me once, "How did you learn to think like this?" And I said, "By being ignored." Sophie started coming by more often. Sometimes she brought groceries. Sometimes just herself. She stopped asking if it was okay. She started acting like it was her house too, like she belonged again. She would sit at the kitchen counter while I answered client emails. She would ask questions, not just about my day, but about my past. "Did you like working?" she asked one afternoon. "I liked being taken seriously," I said. She nodded. "I think I get that now." One evening, she brought a photo album. The old kind, with cellophane over the pages. We hadn't looked through it in years. Most of the photos were faded. But there we were, her in braids and overalls, me in a denim shirt I must have worn every other day back then. She stopped at a picture from a school play. "I remember this. I was the sunflower. You had a fever the day before. I stayed up all night sewing petals to that hat." She looked at me. "I don't remember that part." "I didn't expect you to," I said. We were quiet for a bit. She closed the album. "Do you ever regret it?" "Which part?" "Staying. Giving so much." I thought for a while. "No," I said. "But I do regret not protecting my space better." She looked like she understood that. In April, Daniel asked to meet for coffee. I agreed, against my better judgment. We met at a cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. He looked tired. Not older, just worn. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "For what?" "For raising her." I almost laughed. But I didn't. I just stirred my tea. "You were always the strong one," he added. "I thought that made you cold. But now I see it made you last." I didn't reply. After a moment, he said, "She doesn't talk to me much these days." "That's between you and her." He nodded. "She says she's spending more time with you." "She is. She said you're consulting again." "I am." He smiled, faintly. "You never really left that part of yourself behind, did you?" I looked him in the eye. "No. I just put it on hold. For all of you." We left it there. Back home, I found Sophie in the garden. She'd brought over bulbs, said she wanted to plant something that would last. We worked together, side by side, hands in the soil. It felt good to do something slow and physical. Something that didn't require a strategy or a spreadsheet. As we worked, she said, "Do you think Lily knew what she was doing?" "I think she believed in her own myth," I said. "And that made her dangerous." "Do you think I became like her?" "No," I said firmly. "You followed her because you were looking for something I hadn't given you. But you came back because you realized it was here all along." She nodded, wiping her forehead. "That's the hardest part," she said. "Realizing what you already had." We finished the planting just before dusk. I watched her walk to her car, saw her pause before getting in. She looked back at the house, my house, and gave a small wave. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like something was missing. I started sleeping better. Not dramatically. Not like in the stories where the burden lifts and suddenly the world feels light again. No. Just a little more space in my chest. Fewer dreams about being forgotten in rooms I never meant to leave. Some nights, I'd sit in bed with a cup of tea and reread the files I'd gathered during those weeks of quiet observation. Not out of obsession, just to remind myself I hadn't imagined it. That I hadn't overreacted or misunderstood. The facts were still facts. Lily had walked into our lives with confidence, offered healing, and started rearranging things that weren't hers. And for a while, we let her. The folder stayed in my drawer, organized and closed. Not because I was waiting for her return, because I knew I didn't need to anymore. The power wasn't in what I had on her. It was in what I no longer gave away. One afternoon, Sophie showed up with a request. "I want you to look at my finances," she said, placing a laptop and a folder of printed documents on the kitchen table. "I've been managing it all based on what Lily told me. And I think I made some bad decisions." I opened the folder. Some of it was simple enough: savings, a 401k, a few investments. But there were holes. Coaching expenses listed under business development, overlapping auto payments for software she didn't use, and recurring charges to a life optimization platform Lily had apparently signed her up for. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "A year. Maybe more." I didn't judge. I just took a pen and made notes. "I can help clean this up," I said. "But you'll have to be willing to call and cancel some of these subscriptions yourself. It'll feel messy." She looked relieved, even if she didn't say it. Later that week, she did it. One by one, she made the calls. I sat nearby, pretending to sort receipts while she told strangers on the phone that she was taking control of her finances. Her voice was shaky at first. Then steadier. When she hung up the last call, she turned to me. "I feel like I've been living under a spell," she said. "And now I'm trying to remember what I believed in before." "That's a good place to start," I said. I gave her a small binder labeled Ongoing. It had tabs for expenses, savings goals, and planning notes. Nothing fancy. Just structure. It reminded me of the way I used to manage our household budget when Daniel and I were still pretending things were working. She flipped through it, slowly. "You always did the invisible work," she said. "And I never saw it until someone else pretended to do it and made a mess." I smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. That same week, one of my clients called in a panic. Her younger brother had filed a motion to remove her from the family business. He claimed she was unstable, emotionally unfit to manage company funds. "He's using language from my old therapist's notes," she told me. "Things I shared in confidence, years ago. I think he got them through our mother." I listened, then asked for everything she had: emails, legal paperwork, anything she'd shared with the therapist that might have been used against her. "I'm tired," she said. "I don't want to fight anymore." "You don't have to fight loud," I said. "You just have to fight smart." We drafted a response. I coached her through how to speak to her attorney without sounding like she was on the defensive. I helped her pull tax documents showing her responsible management of funds over the last decade. When it went to court, the judge ruled in her favor. She called me afterward, crying. "I feel like I got myself back," she said. I didn't tell her that I had cried the same way once, years ago, when I kept the house after the divorce, not because I wanted it, but because I needed something to prove that I wasn't just the support beam everyone leaned on and then forgot. Sophie heard about the case secondhand. She stopped by a few days later. "You really helped that woman," she said. I read the article. "She did most of it herself," I replied. "She just needed someone who believed her before the paperwork did." Sophie nodded. "It's hard to prove harm when it comes in soft voices. That stuck with me. Because it was true. The harm Lily had done wasn't dramatic. It didn't come in slamming doors or cruel words. It came through suggestions, subtle exclusions, and the redirection of attention. People think manipulation has to look like control. But often, it just looks like preference. Lily had made herself preferable. More soothing. More supportive. Easier. Until she wasn't. By May, Sophie had taken on a new project at work. Something about community programming and women's leadership. She was in over her head but excited. She asked if I'd look over the pitch deck. "It's not perfect," she said. "But I think I'm finally ready to lead something." I gave her feedback. Honest, specific. The way I would have in the old days. She didn't flinch. She took notes. Later, after dinner, we sat in the living room with tea. She turned toward me and said, "Can I ask something personal?" I nodded. "When you started pulling everything together about Lily, when you saw what was happening, why didn't you just tell me?" I took my time before answering. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said. "You would have thought I was being territorial. Or jealous." She looked down. "You're right. And I didn't want to make you choose," I added. "I just wanted the truth to do its job." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Thank you for not humiliating me." "I wasn't trying to win," I said. "I was trying to stay in my own life." She reached out and squeezed my hand. That was enough. A few weeks later, Daniel sent another email. No subject line. Just a sentence. "Lily left the state." I deleted it. There was no satisfaction in her absence. I didn't need to know where she went. That's the thing about reclaiming space, you don't have to follow the person who took it. You just have to stay rooted in what's yours. By summer, the garden Sophie planted started blooming. A few tulips, some lavender, and a scraggly row of daisies that looked like they were trying very hard to belong. I watered them early in the mornings, before the sun got too sharp. Sophie came over one day and pointed to the tallest tulip. "That one's mine," she said. "They're all yours," I replied. She shook her head. "No. Just that one. The others are yours. You kept them alive." She was right, in a way. I started sleeping better. Not dramatically. There was no single night when I laid my head on the pillow and drifted off without effort. It came slowly, like most real changes do. I stopped jolting awake at 3 a.m., replaying things I couldn't fix. I no longer ran through old conversations in my mind, wondering if I'd said too much or too little. There was space in my chest again. Not happiness, just air. Some nights, I'd go through the files I'd gathered during those weeks of quiet observation. The folder wasn't open on my desk anymore. It was tucked into a cabinet, organized but out of sight. I didn't look at it to relive anything. I looked to remember that it had all actually happened. That I hadn't imagined the slow erasure, the rearranging of roles, the quiet suggestions that I had become outdated. Lily had rewritten our lives while pretending to be helpful. And for a time, we let her. But now, she was gone. Sophie didn't say her name anymore. Daniel's updates had stopped. I imagined Lily starting over somewhere else, with new clients and another version of her story. That part wasn't my concern. The important thing was that she wasn't here, in my house, in my daughter's voice, in the corners of my kitchen. One Wednesday afternoon, Sophie arrived with papers and a laptop. "I want you to look at my finances," she said. "I think I've made a few mistakes." I didn't judge. I made tea and cleared a space at the table. She pulled up her accounts, checking, savings, retirement, and handed me a folder with hard copies of recent statements. Some things were fine. But some weren't. There were automatic payments to services she didn't use, monthly fees for apps Lily had recommended, and small charges that added up over time, subscription-based, healing platforms, access to sacred digital retreats, even one annual charge for energetic branding alignment. Do you remember signing up for all of this? I asked. She shook her head. Not really. Lily would mention something, and I'd say, that sounds nice, and the next day I'd get a welcome email. She used your cards. I must have given them to her. I don't remember. It was hard to hear, but I didn't scold. I just took out a pen and started making a list of what needed to be cancelled, what could be salvaged, and what required closer attention. This is going to take a few weeks, I said. But it's fixable. She looked relieved. I thought you'd be angry. I'm not angry. I've been where you are. Later, after dinner, she stayed to make some of the calls. I sat nearby while she spoke to support agents and explained that she no longer wanted to be enrolled in a service that promised ancestral detox via weekly affirmations. Some agents offered refunds. Some didn't. But by the end of the night, she'd closed 6 accounts. I feel like I'm cleaning someone else's attic, she said. You are, I said. But you lived in that attic for a while. So now it's yours to clear. The next morning, I found her binder, the one I had helped her organize the week before, sitting neatly on the kitchen counter with a new label on the front, Sophie's second try. She didn't mention it when she came by that afternoon. She just brought fresh tulips and asked if I wanted to take a walk. We walked the neighborhood loop. She talked about work. A new initiative. A coworker who kept overstepping in meetings. I offered a few thoughts, but mostly just listened. At the end of the walk, she said, I was scared you wouldn't want to be close to me anymore. I was never the one who pulled away, I said. I know. That's why it's worse. I didn't respond. I just opened the door and let her in. That weekend, I heard from one of my clients, the one whose brother had tried to remove her from their business. She had won her case. The judge ruled that her financial stewardship had been clear and documented, and her brother's claims had no merit. She called to thank me. You helped me speak without shaking, she said. You helped yourself, I replied. I just reminded you that you had a right to be there. She cried then, softly. I stayed on the line until she stopped. Sophie read about the case online, an article in the business section, nothing flashy. She brought it up over lunch. You really helped her, she said. She already had the tools, I told her. She just needed to remember. Sophie nodded, then looked away. I think I used Lily to avoid admitting I didn't know who I was anymore, she said. She filled the silence. And now? I asked. Now I'm trying to get comfortable with the silence. Trying to fill it with things that actually belong to me. That made sense to me. I remembered what that felt like, the slow return to yourself after years of being whatever everyone else needed. A few weeks later, she brought over an old box of hers, scrapbooks, school photos, letters. We sat on the floor of the living room and sorted through it. She found a drawing she'd made in 3rd grade. A stick figure of me labeled, my mom, the fixer. She laughed. I guess I always knew. I smiled, but something in me tightened. Because it wasn't that she hadn't seen me, it was that she'd forgotten the parts that weren't convenient. But she was trying now. That counted. We put the drawings in a new folder, one she labeled, Keep. At some point, I mentioned Daniel had emailed again. No subject line, I said. Just a sentence. Lily left the state. Sophie didn't ask for details. She just said, that sounds like something he'd do. Pretend he's just delivering the news. Not asking for anything. I nodded. He probably wanted a response. Are you going to write back? No. There's nothing else I need to say. She looked at me and said, "That's freedom, isn't it?" Yes. That's exactly what it is. In June, she brought over a small rosemary plant and placed it near the kitchen window. "For the meals you used to make when I was too picky to eat them," she said. "And for the ones I hope you'll still make." It was the first time in years I felt the house open up again, not with noise, but with belonging. And I realized something: I didn't need Lily to be punished. I didn't need Daniel to explain himself. I didn't even need Sophie to make things right. I just needed the quiet to belong to me again. And now it did. By mid-June, the house felt different. Nothing dramatic. No renovations or new furniture. Just quieter, more mine. I started leaving the doors open in the evenings. Let the breeze through. Let the air carry the smell of rosemary, basil, soil. There was a rhythm again: light cleaning in the morning, work in the afternoon, tea at night. Not busy. Just steady. Sophie still came by. Not every day, but often. When she didn't, she'd call. Sometimes it was short, just checking in. Sometimes longer. She'd ask about my clients, tell me about hers, share things that had once been saved for Lily. She'd stopped quoting her entirely. No more half-formed phrases about vibration or sacred growth. Just real language. Words with weight. One Sunday, she brought Daniel. She didn't ask in advance. Just knocked and stood there with him on the porch, her face slightly unsure. "He wants to talk," she said. I looked at him. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Just less certain. He wore a collared shirt, pressed, but the sleeves were wrinkled at the elbows. I stepped aside. Let them in. We sat in the living room. I didn't offer tea. I didn't need to play host. Daniel cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." "You already gave me one," I said. "I know. I mean another one." I waited. I didn't just leave. I let Sophie think that what you gave us wasn't valuable. I made your work look easy. Forgettable. That's on me. I nodded once. Let him continue. "She told me about what you did. With Lily. What you saw before the rest of us." "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I know. But I'm grateful anyway." Sophie looked from him to me, unsure if she should step in. "I think I believed Lily was helping me because she spoke in a language that felt safer than yours," she said. "But that was just familiarity. She told me what I wanted to hear. You told me the truth." "I've never tried to be comforting," I said. "No," Daniel said. "But you kept things solid." We sat in silence for a while. Not warm, but not cold either. Just a space between people who had survived something together, even if they hadn't been on the same side when it happened. Eventually, they left. Sophie kissed my cheek again. Daniel looked at me for a moment, like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. After they were gone, I went to the garden. The tulips were beginning to fade. The lavender was stronger now. The air was thicker with heat. I sat on the bench and closed my eyes. This wasn't closure. I didn't need closure. What I needed was this: peace that wasn't dependent on anyone else's understanding. That week, one of my clients came by in person. A young woman named Rachel, early 30s, trying to get out of a long engagement with a man who had slowly taken control of everything: her accounts, her social circle, even the tone of her voice. "I kept thinking I owed him something," she said. "Because he was patient while I figured myself out." "Patience isn't a currency," I said. "It's not something you repay." She looked down at her hands. "He told me no one else would want me." That I'm too intense. Too complicated. I nodded. I've heard that before. Different words. Same message. How did you get out? She asked. I stopped needing to be liked. And I started documenting. I showed her how to gather her records, how to speak to her bank, how to secure a new email, how to write a letter that sounded firm but not aggressive. You don't need to burn bridges, I said. You just need to stop holding them up. She left with a plan. That night, Sophie called. I've been thinking about something, she said. Do you remember when I told you that Lily felt like an angel? I remember. I think what I meant was that she made me feel special. You made me feel safe. And I didn't know which one mattered more. I let her sit with that. Now I do, she said. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. In July, I got a letter from one of Lily's former clients. She had tracked down my email through a mutual contact. The letter was polite, cautious. She wanted to confirm a few things: Lily's certifications, her licensing history. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to protect Lily. But because I didn't owe anyone else that story. It was done. The truth was out. Whether people believed it or not was no longer my burden. I burned the letter in the sink. Small, clean fire. Nothing dramatic. Later that month, I went to a community workshop Sophie was hosting. A leadership roundtable for women trying to re-enter the workforce. She introduced me, not as her mother, but as a strategist and advisor. She's helped more women than she'll admit, she said. I listened to the panel. I didn't speak. I just watched the room fill with women trying to find the ground again under their feet. I recognized that stage. I had lived in it for years. Afterward, a few approached me. Asked questions. Asked if I'd be willing to meet. I gave them my card. Just a simple one, my name, a number, nothing flashy. On the drive home, Sophie was quiet. Then she said, I used to think being a daughter meant growing up and becoming your own person. It does, I said. But now I think it also means remembering the parts of your mother that shaped you, and figuring out which ones you need to return to. I glanced at her. You've been doing that, I said. Slowly. Carefully. She smiled. Carefully, yes. Slowly, maybe too much. No, I said. It took exactly as long as it needed to. That weekend, I cleared out another cabinet. Got rid of old instruction manuals, broken chargers, expired warranties. At the very back was a small box labeled Next. Inside were things I'd stored without thinking, drafts of resignation letters I never sent, half-finished business plans, notes from a presentation I gave years ago at a conference in Chicago. I reread them. They were good. Not just functional, strong. Precise. I saw myself in them. Not the mother, not the fixer, not the background presence, but the woman I used to be before I made room for everyone else. And she was still there. Just waiting for me to stop apologizing for her. I placed the best pieces in a new folder. Labeled it, too, No More Waiting. August came with a heavy heat that didn't let up. The kind that settled into the walls and made the nights feel longer. I started waking earlier just to get a few cool hours before the air turned thick. Mornings became my favorite part of the day, quiet, still, mine. I kept working. A few clients at a time. I never took on more than I wanted. I said no without guilt now. I didn't explain myself. I didn't soften it. That was new. That was mine. One of my newer clients was a woman in her late 50s. Her name was Margaret. Recently widowed, recently cut out of her son's decision-making. He says it's not personal, she told me during our first meeting. But it feels like I've been replaced by a younger version of myself who never existed. I understood that. I listened, asked questions, helped her organize her accounts, review the will, prepare a letter. But more than that, I gave her space to say out loud what most women aren't allowed to say. I matter, even if I'm not the favorite anymore. She cried at the end of our last session. Thank you, she said. For not making me feel like a burden. You're not, I said. You're just a woman who knows what she's worth. And now you've stopped pretending otherwise. That afternoon, I sat on the back porch and watched the sky darken. Rain was coming. You could smell it, earthy and clean. I thought about how many times I'd ignored my own forecast. All the moments I'd felt the pressure change, but said nothing. That's what women are taught to do. We register the shift in tone, the glance, the silence. And we carry it alone until it builds into something too large to name. But not anymore. Not for me. The next day, Sophie came by with an envelope. She handed it to me without a word. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a short letter, handwritten. Not dramatic. Just direct. I've updated everything, she wrote. You're now listed as my emergency contact, my health proxy, and my trustee. Not because I think you'll agree with every choice I make. But because I know you'll act in my best interest even when it's hard. I folded the letter and looked up at her. Thank you, I said. She smiled. I should have done it sooner. Maybe. But you did it now. We didn't talk about Lily after that. Not directly. Occasionally, her name would come up in passing, an old client still following her blog, or a quote Sophie stumbled across. But it was background noise now. Nothing sharp. Nothing that stuck. What mattered was what came after. By late August, Sophie had asked me to guest speak at her leadership group. Just one session. She didn't pressure me. Just left it open. I said yes. We met in a small rented space above a bookstore. 10 women. Folding chairs. Bottled water and notepads. They looked at me with the kind of expectation I hadn't felt in years, not awe, not reverence, just trust. I spoke for an hour about boundaries, voice, and decision-making. No one will hand you authority, I said. You have to claim it quietly and consistently, without asking for permission. They took notes. Some nodded. A few looked like they were hearing those words for the first time in their lives. Afterward, one of them came up to me. A woman my age. Why don't we say these things to each other more often, she asked. Because we were raised to be grateful, I said. Even when we were being replaced. She put her hand over her heart. Sophie and I walked to the car together afterward. She was quiet, thoughtful. You still know how to hold a room, she said. I never forgot. I just stopped being invited in. Well, now you're invited. We hugged before parting. No fanfare. Just warmth. When I got home that night, I opened the back door and stepped out into the dark. The garden was still. The air was soft. I thought about all the dinners, the silences, the moments I used to fill with effort, hoping to stay needed. I didn't do that anymore. The space didn't scare me now. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. I started writing down things I wanted for myself next year. Not resolutions. Not goals. Just truths. No more apologizing for seeing what others miss. No more sitting at the edge of my own life. No more mistaking silence for safety. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just wrote until the list felt done. And then I turned out the light. In the weeks that followed, I saw Sophie more often. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. We shared time. She cleaned out her apartment, gave away clothes, canceled old subscriptions. She was letting go of the version of herself that had followed Lily. She didn't talk about it. She just acted. That was enough. In early September, Daniel sent one last message. Hope you're well. I'm moving. Downsizing. Thought I'd let you know. No apology. No request. Just information. I deleted it. That, too, was a form of return. Choosing not to carry what wasn't mine anymore. Sophie came by later that week with a small package. I found this, she said. I forgot I even had it. Inside was an old cassette tape. One of those blank ones you used to record voice memos or songs from the radio. It was labeled, Mom, Interview. She shrugged. I think I recorded this for a school project. I must have been 10 or 11. We found my old cassette player in the hallway closet and sat at the table, listening. My voice came through first, calm, steady. Yes, I work from home now. But I used to travel a lot. What did you do? Sophie's small voice asked. I helped people figure out what they were worth, I said. Sometimes in business, sometimes in life. There was a pause. Like a helper. Not exactly. More like a reminder. The tape clicked off a minute later. Sophie didn't say anything for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, I forgot that version of you existed. I didn't, I said. We sat there, the two of us. No music. No distractions. Just the hum of the fridge and the sound of our breathing. She reached out and took my hand. I'm glad you're still here, she said. I never left. And that was true. I had been pushed to the side, misunderstood, ignored, but I had never left. I had stayed. I had observed. I had remembered what others forgot. And when the moment came, I returned, not with anger, not with noise, but with quiet certainty. Now, the house feels different. Not because it's full, but because nothing in it is pretend. Sophie visits. We talk. We sit in silence. We plan. There's room for both of us. I don't track Lily. I don't wonder where she went or who believes her now. That part of the story is over. This isn't revenge. It's return. Not to who I was before I gave everything. But to who I became because I remembered what I gave. And finally, I've come back to the center of my own life.